have a feature request for all games that tell stories. And that feature is the non-standard game over. What's a non-standard game over? This is some way that your experience can end in a non-standard way, I guess, meaning the game ending through a non-combat death. So a good example, the one that has sort of lived with me since the early 2000s, is in Baldur's Gate 2. Very early in the game, you reach this point. They're telling you, please stay with us. You don't have an option to do so, but you can easily imagine how you could easily have responded to that choice. Made it so the player could have said, yes, I'll stay with you. Then the screen fades to black, and either there's a little cutscene or even a text scroll comes up and says, you stayed with them and it was great. And then a child of Baal who was way more powerful than you came and cut your head off. The end. So the eagle-eyed among you probably noticed that that sequence literally doesn't play out the way that I said at all. Does that undermine this entire video? Not at all. Let's lean into this and say that 24-year-old me so wanted a non-standard game over here that I constructed an entire sequence of memories that tricked 48-year-old me into believing that the Dryads were hostile and that they tried to seduce you, which completely doesn't appear to be the case. But in any event, the next example is actually something that really happened. In the beginning of Dragon Age 2, there's a moment where it would be possible for you to say to Flemeth, no, I'm not doing your little FedEx quest. And then Flemeth says, okay, fine, get out of here on your own. And then fade to black, text scroll that says you wandered around until eventually 17 ogres dragged you down and you died. The end. And that's the gist of the non-standard game over. Often in games, these kind of dead-end choices are removed from the player's ability to make. They aren't allowed to say no to the critical path quest. They aren't allowed to just stay in their village and not accept the call of adventure. But that's removing an opportunity to allow the player greater agency. It isn't that they're going to make that choice, have the non-standard game over and say, well, I saw an ending, I guess I finished the game. It's that the existence of these choices provides more agency to the player. In a lot of ways, this is kind of like the renegade choices in Mass Effect. Most people don't choose the renegade option, but its existence provides the player with more agency because they are choosing to pick the Paragon path, even though you could just automatically follow the Paragon path, and for most people, the experience would be the same. In reality, it doesn't feel the same because they didn't choose to pick the Paragon path in that case. You just forced them down that line. By having these branches, you are giving them greater agency, greater free will, a greater experience of controlling their gameplay. So if you're going to do a non-standard game over, how do you do it well? Well, you do want to make sure that the response to the choice are very close together, ideally touching each other. If I decided to say no to Flemeth and Flemeth flies away, and then I play 3 more hours of Darkspawn content, and then the game basically forces me to die, and there's no possible way of me getting to Kirkwall, but I have to play for hours, that's not a good experience because the choice I made that dead-ended my gameplay was a while ago, a long while ago. So if you're going to allow for a non-standard game over, then you want that response to be almost instantaneous. So I make a choice and then instantly the game says, that's cool, haha, you chose to not go on the adventure, the game is over, well done, let's reload, and you can choose the other path. Aren't you clever? And I guess that's the other part of it, is in addition to responding to their choice right away, you also want them to easily be able to undo that. So either there is a save immediately before the choice, or it just rewinds it automatically, or something like that. You don't want them to accidentally not have saved for several hours, decide to stay with the nymphs in Baldur's Gate 2, and then they have to restart the game all over again. While I don't think you should be publicizing your numbers of endings, because I think, like most numbers presented as part of video game marketing, lacking adequate context, they're misleading and aren't very helpful to player buying decisions anyway. This does increase your number of endings because these are legitimate places where the game ends and you lose. So I guess you could count them. You can also very easily end up overdoing this. You don't want to go from a game that has a few places where you're just accentuating and underlining player agency by letting them make the choice that they might be wishing they could make, or at least wishing they could be choosing not to make. You can easily imagine going from that into a state where it is a minefield of non-standard game overs, where every conversation has a wrong turn that you can take, where the game fades to black and says, whoops, you forgot to adequately tip your bartender and he was mean to you, and that means the game ends. So you don't want to do that. You want these to be places where either the choice feels like you should have had it, or where it is impactful in some way to have taken the other path. You don't want to go from 0 of these to hundreds of these. Keep the number of non-standard game overs under control. Depending on your game, that number might be 2 or 3, and it might be 10 or 20, but it shouldn't be hundreds and hundreds, because you very quickly enter into a situation where the player has to be so careful about everything they do that the agency that you are introducing by having non-standard game overs turns into a form of choice paralysis for the player who's now suddenly afraid of accidentally ending their experience. I think this is a feature that is dramatically underused in storytelling games with choices, and RPGs in particular, in part because there is a belief that maybe the fidelity of this response needs to be really high, and I don't think it actually really does. I think you can get away with an end screen like you have at the end of most Dragon Age games, where that just fades to black and you get a couple of stills with some text on them, and it says what would have happened. You said no to Flemeth. Several days later, you got overwhelmed by Darkspawn. The end. You don't have to play that content. You don't have to have a cutscene. You can get away with something pretty simple. That's why I feel like this feature needs to see more use. For a very small investment, you get something that dramatically increases the agency that a player experiences. And even though most people probably won't pick these paths, the fact that they exist improves the experience even of those people who don't pick it, because it makes their choice of not picking the path be a choice, as opposed to being something that's forced upon them. So, dear all game developers, more non-standard game overs, thank you. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you're interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that down in the description. We also have merch. This is 2DAs Forever, which very relevant to talking about Baldur's Gate 2. If you're interested in picking up some merch, there's a shelf below this video. That helps the channel out as well. If you found this interesting, give it a thumbs up. That tells YouTube that they should share it with more people. What are some choices you wish were preserved in games that you've played? Some places where you could see an easy injection of a non-standard game over of some sort. Let me know that down in the comments. I will see you again soon. Thank you.